When should an appraiser use reconciliation? This is a crucial question in the appraisal process. Reconciliation is a step where we bring together the different valuation approaches, like the sales comparison approach, the cost approach, and the income approach, to arrive at a final value estimate. It's important to remember that reconciliation isn't just about averaging numbers. It's about evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of each approach in the context of the property being appraised. This framework helps appraisers consider factors such as the relevance of each method to the property type, the reliability of the data, and the appropriateness given the appraisal's purpose. The goal is to provide the most credible and well-supported opinion of value by synthesizing all available information thoughtfully and carefully. Now, let's talk about the appraisal process, specifically the concept of reconciliation within appraisal. Reconciliation is a crucial step where we analyze and weigh the different appraisal approaches that have been used. Essentially, it's about comparing the various pieces of evidence we've gathered and evaluating their reliability. The goal is to resolve any differences or gaps between these approaches to arrive at a final, well-supported value conclusion. This process ensures that the final appraisal value is accurate and dependable, reflecting a balanced consideration of all relevant information. Here, we're looking at the three traditional appraisal approaches, each offering a distinct perspective on estimating property value. First, the cost approach is best suited for new construction or special purpose properties. It starts by determining the land value, then adds a replacement or reproduction cost of the building, and finally subtracts depreciation due to age, wear, or obsolescence. This approach is particularly useful when dealing with newer properties. Next, the market approach relies on active comparable markets. It compares a subject property to recent sales of similar properties, adjusting for differences in features, location, and timing. This method is highly persuasive when there is robust and reliable comparable sales data available. Lastly, the income approach is ideal for income-producing assets. It values the property based on the income it can generate, taking into account rents, expenses, and applying capitalization or discount rates. This approach is most relevant for investor-driven real estate, where income potential is a key factor in valuation. Each approach offers unique insights, and the choice depends largely on the property type and available data. Here, we're looking at why differences can occur between various appraisal approaches. First, market data limitations play a big role. Sometimes one approach relies on data that is less available or less reliable, which can weaken its accuracy compared to another. Next, property-specific factors come into play. Different characteristics of property might align better with the income approach, the cost approach, or the sales comparison approach. So this affects which method gives a clearer picture. Then, variations in the condition of the property are important. Buyers and appraisers might view these condition differences differently, which influences how comparable properties really are. Lastly, market timing is crucial. Data that's a bit older may not reflect current market behavior, so using outdated inputs can lead to discrepancies between approaches. All these factors together help explain why the same property might have different valuations depending on the approach used. When we look at real estate markets, it's important to understand that no two properties compete in exactly the same way. Factors like location, condition, age, zoning, income potential, and renovation history all play a role in this. Because of these differences, one appraisal method might capture market behavior more accurately than another for a given property. Markets themselves don't move in a uniform way either. In areas that are mixed use or rapidly changing, shifts in demand, a lack of comparable properties, and varying investor expectations can all create bigger gaps between value estimates. This higher level of complexity means that reconciling different appraisal approaches becomes even more crucial. Neighborhood signals and market nuances contribute to why values can diverge from one appraisal to another. Ultimately, property traits and market behavior rarely line up perfectly across all valuation methods. So understanding this complexity helps us interpret value estimates more effectively. Now, let's talk about when reconciliation becomes essential in the valuation process. Reconciliation is crucial whenever we face conflicting or inconsistent data points that require careful judgment to determine the most credible value. For example, if the evidence points in different directions and we have to decide which indication holds the most weight, Reconciliation helps us navigate these discrepancies. It's especially important when there are large gaps between results from different approaches. These wide spreads signal the need to explain why one indication is more reliable than another, ensuring our final conclusion is well supported. In cases involving mixed property types, like those with blended uses or hybrid characteristics, no single method fits neatly. Judgment becomes critical here to reconcile the varied inputs. Market transitions also call for reconciliation. When conditions are changing rapidly, with unstable demand or shifting prices, one data set might lag behind another, and reconciliation helps us account for these timing differences. For unique or specialized properties with limited comparables, reconciliation is essential to establish credibility because data can be sparse or atypical. Finally, when market, income, and cost approaches do not align, reconciliation allows us to turn these conflicting inputs into a consistent and defensible conclusion. Essentially, reconciliation is a process that ensures, despite conflicting evidence, our valuation remains reliable and justifiable. Here we see a key issue: wide valuation spreads, which act as a reconciliation trigger. The range test shows a significant $155,000 spread between the different appraisal approaches. Looking closely, the sales comparison approach gives the lowest value indication at $845,000. The cost approach falls in the middle at $910,000. Meanwhile, the income approach provides the highest indication at $1 million. This creates an 18.3% gap between the lowest and highest valuations. What does this mean? When the appraisal methods produce such materially different results, it signals that more careful analysis is needed. The appraiser must pause, dig deeper into assumptions, and work to reconcile these indications with greater scrutiny to reach a reliable conclusion. This variance itself becomes important evidence in the overall valuation process. Here, we're focusing on the complexity of certain properties. Unique or specialized properties often present challenges because their unusual architecture means it's hard to find direct comparables in the market. This makes traditional valuation methods less reliable. Additionally, when a property is designed for a specialized use, like a medical facility or a data center, certain valuation approaches tend to be more accurate than others. Understanding these complexities helps us select the right method to assess value more effectively. On this slide, we're focusing on market conditions and how they impact the appraisal process, especially when the market is in transition and experiencing volatility. When pricing shifts rapidly, traditional indicators like older comparable sales, income inputs, and cost assumptions no longer align as they used to. This misalignment makes reconciliation more challenging because each valuation approach might be reflecting a different point in time within the market cycle. It's crucial for the appraiser to use judgment in determining which signals are most current rather than relying on an average of conflicting data points. For example, lagging comparables can cause older sales to overstate today's market value, while rapid repricing means recent sales may not fully capture current buyer behavior. This creates a heavier reliance on professional judgment. The trend signals here highlight that reconciliation risk is elevated during volatile markets. Values can move upward or downward quickly, and different appraisal approaches might show significant divergence even when assessed on the same date. Understanding these dynamics helps ensure a more accurate and reliable valuation despite the inherent challenges of a changing market environment. Let's walk through a 5-step reconciliation workflow that moves us from raw value indications to a final, well-supported opinion of value. First, we analyze each applicable valuation approach by assessing the quality and relevance of the data and how accurately it reflects the subject property. Next, we identify the differences between the indications by examining the assumptions, market evidence, and property-specific factors that cause variations. Then we weight and prioritize these approaches, giving more emphasis to the method that is most reliable for specific assignment and asset. After that, we justify this weighting clearly, ensuring the reasoning is transparent so anyone reviewing the analysis understands why certain indications carry more credibility. Finally, we conclude with a value opinion that is supported by this disciplined, documented process, one that is consistent and appropriate for the intended use. Each step systematically narrows uncertainty and strengthens the confidence in our final conclusion. When it comes to reconciliation logic, weighting approaches are the critical decisions an appraiser must make. It's important to understand that weighting is not simply averaging the different valuation methods. Instead, the appraiser places the greatest emphasis on the approach that is most relevant, best supported, and most credible based on the property and the available market evidence. The core rule here is to assign more weight to reliability rather than mathematical convenience. In other words, the method that provides the most dependable and defensible value indication should carry the most weight in the final reconciliation. Looking at an illustrative weighting breakdown, the sales comparison approach is considered the primary market signal. This approach reflects the most direct buyer behavior and is backed by the strongest comparable support. The cost approach serves as secondary support. While it's useful for valuing the physical assets, the estimates of depreciation in this method tend to reduce certainty and thus lower its weight. The income approach receives limited emphasis. It's applied when rental and yield data are available, but investor evidence is less robust, making it less influential in the final value conclusion. To decide the final weighting, several key factors act as decision filters. These include data quality, such as the depth, recency, and comparability of evidence, as well as property fit, meaning how well each approach aligns with how the asset is actually bought and sold in the market. Credibility is also crucial, ensuring that the chosen conclusion is explainable and supportable. In this example, you can see a breakdown where 50% weight is given to sales comparison, 30% to the cost approach, and 20% to the income approach, illustrating how these principles are applied thoughtfully to reach a reliable and sound value conclusion. On this slide, we're focusing on the key standards for reconciliation in the appraisal process. First, documentation and transparency are essential. It's not enough to just present a final value. We need to clearly explain why one approach was favored over another. This means showing the reasoning behind decisions, which adds depth and credibility to the appraisal. Next is weighting logic. Any conclusions drawn must be supported by solid evidence, such as relevant market data, specific property characteristics, and the reliability of each valuation approach. This evidence is what makes the value opinion trustworthy and convincing. Finally, the audit trail is crucial. The entire reconciliation process should be thoroughly documented so that anyone reviewing the appraisal can easily follow how the analysis led to the final conclusion. This review-ready record safeguards both the appraisal's integrity and the appraiser's professional reputation. Together, these standards form the foundation of a rigorous and defensible appraisal workflow. When dealing with reconciliation risks, it's crucial to be aware of common pitfalls that can undermine the integrity of your analysis. One major issue is over-reliance on a single approach. Instead of defaulting to a favorite method, it's important to test which approach best fits the property, data quality, and current market behavior. This flexibility helps ensure your conclusions are well-founded. Another frequent pitfall is bias replacing analysis, especially when ignoring outliers. Large value gaps should prompt further investigation rather than being dismissed without explanation, because each discrepancy can hold valuable insights into reliability of your data or assumptions. Circular reasoning is also a significant danger. This happens when you use a preferred conclusion to justify your weighting decisions, and then use those weightings to prove a conclusion, creating a self-reinforcing loop that lacks objective foundation. Lastly, insufficient documentation can weaken your entire process. If you don't clearly record why certain approaches were emphasized, discounted, or excluded, the final opinion becomes difficult to defend under scrutiny. Maintaining a strong audit trail is essential for transparency and credibility in reconciliation. Recognizing and addressing these risks will greatly improve the robustness of your analysis. When it comes to reconciliation limits, it's important to recognize when not to reconcile multiple valuation approaches. For example, the cost approach tends to be most reliable for newly constructed homes. Since depreciation is limited in these cases and replacement costs are easier to estimate, this method often carries more weight. On the other hand, the income approach is more dominant for investment properties with strong income data. Buyers and sellers focus heavily on earnings, making this approach the best reflection of value in those scenarios. The sales comparison approach works well in markets where there are plenty of highly comparable sales. In such cases, recent transactions clearly indicate how participants price similar properties, so relying on this method alone might be sufficient. The key takeaway here is that if one method clearly reflects the market, trying to give equal consideration to all approaches can introduce confusion rather than clarity. Reconciliation isn't necessary when alternative approaches are weak, irrelevant, or simply unsupported for the type of property we're valuing. Instead, focusing on the dominant evidence helps provide a more accurate and insightful valuation. Technology and data tools play a crucial role in enhancing the appraisal reconciliation process. Modern appraisal platforms enable appraisers to compare different approaches more quickly, test their assumptions, and validate market evidence with greater confidence. This leads to final reconciliation that is not only more consistent, but also transparent and defensible. Better market inputs come from leveraging multiple sources like MLS, sales databases, and public records. These resources improve the quality of comparable data and help reduce gaps caused by missing information. This is essential for building a robust foundation for analysis. Stronger analysis is made possible through the use of spreadsheets and specialized valuation software. These tools help identify outliers, examine value ranges, and clarify the logic behind weighting, which improves the reliability of conclusions. Clearer support is provided by audit trails and digital work files, which create a detailed record of the appraisal process. This makes the final reconciled conclusion easier to explain and justify to stakeholders. Operationally, these tools accelerate cross-checks by allowing cost, sales, and income evidence to be compared within a single workflow. This not only streamlines the review process, but also strengthens decision support. Appraisers can clearly document why one approach deserves more emphasis, making their conclusions more defensible and easier to communicate. In this slide, we're focusing on professional standards and the SPAP, which stand for the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. A key concept here is reconciliation, which is not just about arriving at a final value number, but about providing reasoned support for that number. A SPAP requires appraisers to thoroughly explain how they analyze the different valuation approaches, why they gave more weight to certain pieces of evidence, and how the final value conclusion is credible given the specific assignment. We refer to standards Rule 1-6 and 2-2, which emphasize that the appraiser must reconcile both quality and quantity of data used in the approaches. In addition, the report must clearly communicate the reasoning behind the analyses, opinions, and conclusions to ensure transparency and credibility. Finally, it's important to note that the work file must include support for this reconciliation, documenting the rationale behind the appraiser's decisions. Overall, these core principles ensure that appraisal reports are well supported, transparent, and reliable. To wrap up, the key takeaway here is the importance of reconciliation when you're faced with multiple credible approaches that give different value indications. Instead of just averaging those results, it's crucial to weight each method based on factors like relevance, the quality of data, and how the market is actually behaving. Especially when the assignment is complex, unique, or the market is volatile, thoughtful reconciliation becomes even more critical. Ultimately, a strong final value opinion is one that you, as the appraiser, can explain clearly, support thoroughly, and document properly. Remember, reconciliation is there to strengthen your judgment, not replace it.